And boom, we should be live in a second here. Everybody in the chat, if you can hear us and see us, please give me a thumbs up. Thanks for your patience here. And once I just verify we're live, I'll hit record and we'll fire this podcast up. Very excited to have our buddy Saul on today. Let's see. Looks like we're good here. I don't know if this is a setting that I have in my Zoom, but you're not showing up, Saul, because you're not showing your video. Weird. You should show your picture at least. I'm looking right now on our live stream and I'm not seeing you. Could you give me a check talk and see if we see you?
Yeah, let me just do that. Am I showing up? I'm showing up on my screen.
Yeah, not seeing you.
So right now it's you, and now it's me.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's just showing your name on the stream. That's so weird. That doesn't show your picture on the stream.
It is odd. You know, Zoom has been having some strange, I don't know, some strange glitches lately, because it was doing that with me not too long ago, and then it stopped doing it, but not because I did anything. This is fun. Yeah, showing live. It's showing my picture on my live thing. So are you looking over at what's happening on
yeah, I'm going to share to Telegram and we'll just work with it. Also, if you have any screen shares I can do, I'll do that during the show, because that always is fun to look at. We could look at your site and look at some other stuff. So
sure. Yeah, let me know.
No worries. Okay, let me just share that we're live and then I'll hit record and we'll fire this up. And yeah, excited. You know, we're going to touch on all of our favorite topics today, it sounds like. So
right on, yeah.
I've been really enjoying your continual mission to help support the knowledge around the virus lie. That's been really great, Saul. You've really championed that the last couple of years.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's one of my little babies I've been carrying along.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit record right now, and we'll get this going. And boom, we're back for another episode of AlphaCast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here as always with the grand beloved Dr. Bear Paul Lando, the man on the other side of the river there on the South Fork in the beautiful Big Flat, crushing it as always on the farm, doing what he can do best. Bear Lando, how are you today?
I'm doing good, and thank you as usual for that opening superlative. How's things going over in the in Lower Skabo there on your side of the river?
Couldn't be better. We've been in the river every day. Just so blessed with how healthy it is. The water is just amazing. I did take a nasty spill a couple of days ago, and my entire right leg is just full of abrasions, and my right hip is completely covered with contusions. I fell about 10 feet down a 2,000-foot cliff, trying to do a pretty gnarly gifting of organite, and was in my earth runners like an idiot. And lucky I didn't break anything. The angels were definitely supporting me there. I literally fell head over heels down the side of a mountain and walked away pretty much unscathed, except for some nasty cuts. So yeah, that's been my week.
We're glad it wasn't serious, but you realize they were probably watching you from the Death Star and hit you with a disequilibrium ray that made you fall down the cliff there. They don't want anybody messing with their screwing up the ozone there.
Well, the good thing is the organite was installed, and I don't know if you guys got a little bit on Sunday, but we got a little bit of rain literally in the beginning of August on Sunday. Raindrops started falling on our head.
Yeah,
it was pretty wild. So that was cool.
I was out setting irrigation, and I started getting a couple drops on my face, and I was like, what's going on? Do I have a leak here that's spraying up at me? I looked up, it was actually sprinkling.
Yeah, God was taking a tinkle, I guess, as I'd say as a kid. But it was really cool to see. And we had some family visiting, and they went and floated the river with getting sprinkled on. It was a trip. Felt like I was in Hawaii. So, and I'm wearing one of my new Hawaiian shirts I got for you as an homage to you, Bear Lando. So, it's kind of
Nice.
Hawaiian. It's
Classy.
almost more like Fijian, really. But stoked to have Saul
Means you're
Luckman
getting to
on.
be an old man. Only geezers wear Hawaiian shirts anymore. You know, when I was in my 20s, 30s, that was like the rage. We were back and forth with Hawaii before we moved there full time, and you know, even on North Shore Oahu, there, you know, all the young surfers were wearing aloha shirts, but became kind of out of vogue here with the new radical wave of what do we call the aggro surfers?
Oh yeah. No, they're back. The Hawaiian shirts are back, definitely with the kiddos.
Nice.
So you can start wearing yours again. And we do have a surfer with us today. We were just talking a little surf talk before we hit record. Saul over on the East Coast, and excited to go deep in with him today. Saul Luckman is this is the second time on the show with us. He's award-winning novelist, and he's returning to guide us on a magical mystery tour. Saul Luckman is a pioneering visual artist, award-winning novelist and humorist, and best-selling author of nonfiction books on health, spirituality, and consciousness. As an accomplished ink and acrylic painter, Saul offers a glimpse of this universe of intelligent energy in his artwork as objects condition space with their essence and vice versa. And the outside conflates with the inside because all is one. Saul's international bestsellers spanned fiction with Snooze and Cali the Destroyer, nonfiction, Conscious Healing, Potentiate Your DNA, and humor satire, The Angel's Dictionary, Musings from a Small Island. In his bold, colorful compositions, 3 of which have been featured on the covers of Itzhak Beery's The Gift of Shamanism, Shamanic Transformation, and Shamanic Healing, Saul is committed to exploring and depicting energy. This podcast will leave no stone unturned as Saul's intrepid explorations into fake science, the present global dystopia, and the very nature of consciousness are congruent with the philosophical leanings of us here on AlphaCast. Why are some vulnerable to the mind parasites? While many of us laugh them off, are accepted historical accounts the biggest fables of all, and what constitutes the true fabric of our realm? Well, we're going to dive into all these topics, much more today. Dr. Bear Lando, take it away.
Hey, gentlemen. Actually, Saul Luckman is a pseudonym for Kelly Slater, who we actually have on here today. So hi, Saul. Anyway, it is good to be in the company of fellow surfers here. And we could talk surfing the whole time. But Saul, hey, great for you to join us. Always good to chat with you. We've had a lot of great chats over the phone. We've had great chats. You know, both Mike and I have been on your platform. You've been with us. So good to have you back. Thanks for making time with us. We have a lot of ground to cover. You know, we share so many similar interests, simulation, shamanism, healing, DNA, predispositions based on what's going on in our consciousness. So why don't we start off by you telling us what's new? You know, I get your regular newsletter with podcast, that you put out there, and I really enjoy them. I'd encourage our audience to really check them out. And Mike will put all the links for those in the show notes here. But Saul, good to see you. And thanks for being with us. So tell us what you're up to these days, and then we can kind of use that to segue into, whatever we want to dive into.
Well, thanks, Dr. Bear, and thanks, Mike. I'm really stoked to be here. I was mentioning before we came on that I've been riding my Pipo board a lot lately. I've come from a body surfing background, so I'm kind of learning the board world a little bit now, and increasing my skills as a waterman. So that's been a lot of fun. But I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Body surfing can be pretty gnarly. You ever watch those guys down at the Wedge in Southern California? They're doing crazy stuff.
Definitely. Like Mark Cunningham was a really big influence of mine. He cut his teeth in that world in Hawaii, and is still considered to be the greatest living body surfer. He's just really, really incredible. I mean, I'm nowhere near that level, but I've gotten pretty good. I can hang with some of the younger guys in where I surf in Florida, and I can catch some kind of crazy crazy waves. But the wedge is a different animal entirely. That'll break you in two if you're not careful.
I grew up on the wedge because that's where I'm from. And that's why I grew up as what surfers would classically call a sponger and a body surfer because of those kind of breaks. Same with Corona del Mar right there. Big, heavy, really concave breaks there that were hard to surf. And I definitely almost died at the wedge when I was 14. I was held under for a good couple minutes, it felt like, and came out on the sand and was puking and all that. So I've had my bouts with the wedge, Sir Lando, if you didn't know that. What a heavy, heavy wave that is.
Yeah, super, super heavy. So anyway, that's I have a lot of respect for people who can take that on. I'm a little bit more of a lightweight, but I mean, I can get up into some pretty good stuff when when the curve is right and it's not such a downward momentum. But that really kind of throws off my game a little bit. But in terms of what I've been doing, I mean, I may have even said this before. I still spend a lot of time at attending Alfa Vedic University. You guys have such a great podcast, and there's always so much just fascinating material you put out, and you always send me down a lot of rabbit holes of research and exploration. So you've definitely done it again. I would say I've spent the last several weeks neck deep in Jason Bashir's work and simulation theory, and looking at a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of, but also a lot that I was aware of, and how many connections there are to my thought process and to my nonfiction books on energy healing. And they're deeply they're absolutely full of a kind of holographic view of reality.
Yeah, Jason is pretty amazing. He's encyclopedic as far as his, his research and his knowledge, and interesting guy, very interesting guy. We're going to have him back on again pretty soon too. So,
yeah, I would love to just talk
ahead.
a little bit about the simulation concept and
okay,
kind of where I'm coming from and how I'm meeting up with that material. I know a lot of people are looking into this. You've had like Santos Bonacci, is that his last name, has interviewed
yes.
Jason, and he just went on with Max Egan or Max Eigen. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but very big figure. And so he's getting a lot of traffic. So I know that his numbers are spiking, and so there's a lot of interest in what he's putting out, and I think for good reason, because if he's right, we're headed into some pretty intense and amazing events in the not so distant future.
Yeah, the Phoenix event is in the early 2040s, according to his calculations, and it's actually a conjunction with the other event I'm blanking on right now. So we're looking at
the Nemesis X object and
Nemesis X, correct. And what's interesting is this ties in with like Diehold Foundation's similar predictions, which come from a totally different angle. And Jason would say that is not congruent with where he's coming from. But I only bring that up because there are other traditions too that all seem to point at this like 2040s time period. So yeah, I think a lot of people are interested in this because it kind of is a big deal if there's any sort of truth there. We're talking about massive, massive global change.
Yeah, I mean, I think the what got me really interested in that leading up to it was looking more into concepts around Tartaria. And I know there's a tremendous amount of disagreement on what that even means, but just the idea of mud floods and pre-existing civilization resets and hidden history or history that's been covered up and all of that, obviously that ties into Jason's research into simulation theory and the idea that we have these cataclysmic events that are programmed into the simulation, one of them being the Phoenix, the other being this Nemesis X object that he talks about. And so he's, come up with this idea, and I know he's been on the show, but that there's a 138-year cycle, which is the Phoenix cycle. It's actually a kind of cleansing mechanism, thus the name. There's a rebirth aspect to it, and it's designed in some ways to keep, I know this is such a rabbit hole, it turns into a rabbit hole really fast, but according to him, the Phoenix Protocol is designed to keep the Archons and the Archontic forces, their minions, in check. So that's a very fascinating aspect of this discussion that we might have. But I thought I would just kick off, you know, and I know, Dr. Bear, you're very well versed in this material, but you know, lest people think this is completely just you know, out coming from left field. I wanted just to share that there was this 2012 study, I think it was at Bonn University in Germany, and it was looking at cosmic rays, and it was looking at a kind of energy shift that they are supposed to contain, whatever they are, and however you want to define the word cosmic. But anyway, they end up revealing this kind of underlying pattern or lattice that was hypothesized to be a kind of created artifice, a kind of simulation. And we're talking about, you know, a hologram here, and you can look back at Michael Talbot's wonderful book, the Holographic Universe, and everything that he had to say on this subject, and many other individuals who have looked at this question. There's an article I'm looking at right now from Science Daily back in 2012. It was talking about this, and the article is, "Do we live in a computer simulation run by our descendants?" No, that's not what I think Jason is saying necessarily. It would be less, not so much our descendants and more so our true selves may be running the simulation. But in any case, it's an entire article on this idea that we're living in a simulation that's designed to help us learn how to, I don't know, improve our systems or survive or do something positive in terms of the human race.
Yeah, and you know, it's not far-fetched at all, because cultures, people, you know, for eons have understood how the simulation works. And it gets into all the things we talk about, you know, as far as how electrical forces are, you know, precipitate through the ethers to create our entire reality, our bodies, and how we're all individualizations of the grand design that has the ability to project our little simulations within simulations. But it also really explains the science. You know, people like Jason and yourself, you know, you're great at bringing forth the more the historical understanding as far as how the simulation has been manipulated, and you know, how different time clocks have been conceived in order to control people. But the main thing, you know, from my perspective, is understanding the science behind it, because then rather than just wringing our hands and saying, well, somebody's manipulating us or has created, you know, this holographic universe, you know, that we're now captive of, we can actually do something about it. And I believe that's what the simulation is about, is us being in an incubation period where we learn how to create the simulation we want. And, you know, the science also explains very clearly how other entities who are not, you know, in the mass hypnosis and actually creating it can manipulate us on the mental plane and capture our attention, and therefore our whole creative impulse, our creative consciousness, to create the world that they want, and seduce us into thinking that we can't do that for ourselves. So yeah, anywhere, you know, you want to take that, but there's just so much, not just evidence, but ways that we can verify that for ourselves by taking these forces that the ancients talked about as far as how the simulation is created in the first place, and recreate them in the lab and you know, in medicine and everything that we do. So it's not just conjecture when you take these principles and then apply them and then have your own experience. You say, wow, that's really how the universe works, and it can't be anything else but a projection, a simulation, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing.
Well stated. Yeah. There's so much in what you just said to unpack, but let's start off by just maybe outlining the concept of the simulation that I'm working off of. And maybe we can eventually get to the parasitic manipulation, how that works, and then what we can do about that, you know. But I wanted to segue maybe through some of my material, especially from my first nonfiction book, Conscious Healing. I wanted to share a few moments from that really tie into this entire conversation. I was just going back through and looking at what I had written. I mean, a lot of it I frankly had forgotten I even wrote. I've just moved on in so many ways. And I'm like, oh my God, I was absolutely, steeped in this from day one. This was the first book I actually published all the way back in 2005. So I was going to share a little bit of that on the this concept of the holograph, the hologram, the holographic reality, the simulation, all of that sort of thing. But then I'd love to get into Archons and that kind of programming if we can take the conversation in that direction.
Also, just so you know, someone in chat said Jason Archaics. Jason did mention you, Saul, one of your books in one of his streams. So he's giving you some love.
Oh, cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm wanting to reach out and maybe do an interview with him if he's up for that. He's very reachable. So I was just going to contact him and see, if he wants to do that. And I had some other. I also really wanted to talk about before just lay this out there to you guys. I'd love to touch on the notion of the vapor canopy. And I would love to talk about some of my thoughts on that and some of my experiences with things that might be aspects of the vapor canopy.
Definitely, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you could just
I'd love to
remind
hear
me.
that.
Okay, so these are the things that I've been kind of thinking about. So I'm just going to read a few excerpts, a handful of excerpts from and some quotes that are in Conscious Healing, and that's book 1 on the Regenetics method. You can find that all over the place. It's if you go to phoenixregenetics.org and look up the book Conscious Healing, you'll find it there. It's an issue embedded PDF, and you can read it for free. So there it is. So from the perspective of quantum biology, the human body is a hologram composed of intersecting lines of bioenergy. And so I have this figure in the book. So the above figure shows how the vertical light processing chakras interface with the horizontal sound generated electromagnetic or torsion fields to create the geometric matrix necessary for physical manifestation. So there I was, seeing us as a kind of simulation inside a simulation. We're informed fields interacting with a greater set of informed fields. And of course, not only is that really resonant with a lot of today's science, it's also very resonant with many ancient esoteric wisdom traditions. Now I'm going to, let me just pull up one more thing here. I lost.
Well, I was going to pull up the screenshot of that. I'm trying to find it on the site again. What's the link again?
It's phoenixregenetics.org. And then it's the tabs, I think the tab is books maybe, or Conscious Healing. Let me see where that would be.
Conscious Healing. Yeah, I'm there.
You see it?
Uh-huh.
Is it pulling up? Yeah, it's under books. It's Conscious Healing, and it's just a page that has it there. You can just read it right there. Just scroll down. It's right there. So as our bioenergy blueprint, this ecosystem that we're talking about, I'm just reading. It functions as a compendium of all the data pertinent to our well-being and in fact to our entire lives. This is kind of our own energetic blueprint. So you have in the Michael Talbot in the Holographic Universe talking about this. I have a naturopath named Stephen Lindstedt who talks a lot about this. He says, that interruption or distortion in the range, strength, and coherency of this energy system leads to breakdown in the body's self-healing mechanisms. And then you have this physician and author, Richard Gerber, who wrote Vibrational Medicine. He actually contends that, the fields are so primary that if we can't alter that basic blueprint, that healing can't be permanent. We have to actually alter the blueprint. And I know, Bear, with a lot of the products and things that you're bringing out that are energetically infused, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say you probably agree with some of these statements.
You're muted, Bear.
I'm going to
Yes,
keep.
I do. Absolutely.
Okay. So, so my partner Lee and I spent a lot of time mapping out these fields, these ecosystems, as we like to call them. So they're these energy fields that basically contain all of the data for how you work as a living being, and it includes your illness patterns or traumas or other things that might actually distort these patterns. And so I say, what if on some level we are made of sound? What if in the beginning was the word? What if the music of the spheres is no myth? What if we ourselves are a harmonic convergence? What if the holographic grid of our being is a linguistic and musical interface between higher dimensional light, which might be considered a form of divine thought or intention, and sound in higher dimensional octaves? So I went on to say we live not just in a holographic, but in a harmonic universe. And so we can talk about things like cymatics and frequency medicine and all that kind of thing. And so I'm like, I'm checking all this stuff out going, oh my goodness, it's really, really extraordinary. I get into Richard Alan Miller's work. He's a physicist, and he's written a lot of very interesting papers, but he has this whole theory about precipitated reality. And I quote him: superposed coherent waves of different types in the cells interact to form diffraction patterns, first in the acoustic or sound domain, and secondly in the electromagnetic or light domain. This leads to the manifestation of physical form as a, quote, quantum hologram, a translation between acoustical and optical holograms. So it's really sound and light. And this is what I was talking about all along in my work. And, he does a lot of outlining of what he calls quantum bioholography. Very, very fascinating, to see how all of this lines up with simulation theory, because we could look at this as a molecular physical phenomenon where you have the cells generating all of this energy, but we can also look at it as pure simulation where different aspects of the simulation are interchanging different energy frequencies that are all simulation derived.
Yeah, we had
Right.
Doc Ram on Richard Allen Miller on AlphaCast a couple of years back, and he's actually not far from us up in Grants Pass area. I believe he's still there.
Yeah, I thought he was in
Yeah,
your neck of the woods.
We should touch base with him again. He
Yeah,
is.
I got to go see him. I promised to go visit him, and I'm long overdue, so I'm going to do that. We've got some great talent up in our neighborhood here. We've got Ron Gibson, we've got Dr. Miller, so a lot of good folks. So Saul, everything you're saying is so amazingly right on, and then if we just simplify it and understand that everything, of course, begins from those progenitor waveforms. And waveforms have different dimensions. A few of those dimensions are sound and light. And when you understand the nature of waveform mechanics, then you have basically intersecting composites of waveforms that are created by, an idea, a complete thought pattern of creation. Of course, the original creators, were plasma entities of intelligent design that, the 7 rays and so forth. And then all of those intersect in ways. And every time we have an idea, it's a play of those original forces. And then when we look inside the body, we have, of course, the mainline chakras, which are just representations of those plasma fields in the sky clock above us. And then there's, additional chakras, energy centers that, mimic the larger constellations. But when you kind of, see it in its most simplest form and then break through all the verbiage, it's pretty easy to see that, yeah, everything is sound and light, and they're all dimensions of these same waveforms coming from universal consciousness.
Right on. I mean, there's so many people from so many different, walks of life and disciplines are arriving at this conclusion. You've got like Dr. Carl Pribram talking about how the cerebral cortex, according in his model, is operating hand in hand with something like a universal or a subatomic hologram, right? You know, and then you've got somebody like Dr. Leonard Horowitz saying that, you know, you have a hologram inside a hologram that's giving rise to life as a function of this creative consciousness. And for me, you know, the first question when we go down this road is, what is this creative consciousness that's giving rise to the simulation? And then the second question is, what is our relationship to it? And then, you know, the third question, not to, you have to pardon my French, but, you know, what the fuck happened?
Yeah.
Because clearly, you know, there are some glitches in the matrix here. And I think it's really important to understand where those come from, kind of what they mean, and what they mean for us moving forward, and what can we do about them, or how can we work with them.
Yeah, you're talking about essentially what is the nature of to be a living man or woman in this plane? What is evil? And these are deep philosophical questions, but why is there evil? And I think one of the great, traditions you look to and we look to is Gnosticism.
Absolutely. It's Gnosticism really takes that on directly. You know, it really is talking about the nature of evil. I mean, there's an entire, at this point in time, there's an entire field of study, ponerology, which is a study of the nature of evil. And then you also have people like Paul Levy out there. He wrote Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. And he's looking at evil as a kind of he's looking at the world as suffering from a kind of collective mind control, and he gives it a sort of Native American spin. But I have a quote from him that's really fantastic. From I think this is the description, just Dispelling Wetiko. He says that there is a contagious psychospiritual disease of the soul, a parasite of the mind, that is currently being acted out en masse on the world stage via a collective psychosis of titanic proportions. This mind virus, which Native Americans have called Wetiko, covertly operates through the unconscious blind spots in the human psyche, rendering people oblivious to their own madness and compelling them to act against their own best interests. And I mean, enter the pandemic, right? This is a perfect description of what we've seen for the last 2.5 years.
So the question, Saul, is why do some of us just laugh at it? As far as all these narratives that are really ludicrous, and it'd be laugh out loud if they weren't so destructive to some people. But why do other people just fall, prey to these things when they're on their face so obviously untrue?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question, really. And, I think without talking about, without breaking down the nature of the simulation and the Archons and the artificial intelligence, it's a little difficult to answer that question. So here's how I see things, and this is from my way of looking at a lot of different material, and this would include, but not be limited to, Jason's material, because I don't agree with everything that he has to say, and I would challenge him on certain points, and we could even talk about what those are. I mean, I would do that with him too, for that matter. So
as I would.
So there are, the way I see it is that some aspect of ourselves is outside of the simulation, and maybe it's you could think about that being our people that we belong to, and that we are students who have signed up to be plugged into this simulation to learn life lessons that will help us become more mature, capable creators, so that at some point when we step into what I would call like our light body, Jason likes to call it the avatar, the permanent avatar, but whenever we actually adopt an ascended physiology and become as gods, we are responsible with that power. It's the Spider-Man quote, right? With great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. So I think that's the mentality of behind the simulation. So the simulation is created and we plug into it, and this could be in some kind of matrixy way. You know, I know Jason likes to talk about how our nervous system is the kind of filter that plugs into the simulation, the simulacrum, whatever you want to call it. So we go through these life experiences, or various lives, incarnations, life sims, whatever you want to call them, and we keep feeding the information back into not only the simulation, but to ourselves and maybe our teachers or guides who are on the other side, who exist in what you might call reality, because this is clearly not reality. This is some kind of simulation. So we are in the classroom. It's the veil of soul making. You know, there are lots of names that have been given to this in poetry and in mystical writings over the centuries. So here we are, we're learning, and we are in a kind of symbiotic relationship with the simulation. We get information from outside the simulation, which would be from ourselves many times, from our higher selves, who are that part of us that's sort of taking the simulation. Like, for example, all of the regenetic stuff came from that point. I know, and I actually had a visual experience of seeing that higher self, and I write about this in Potentiate Your DNA. And so I really get this dynamic that we live inside the simulation and outside the simulation, and those levels of our being are in interaction, constant interaction. It's a kind of feedback loop. Are you guys hearing me? Am I okay? Sometimes I just feel like I'm, talking.
No, you're good. And in your book, Potentiate Your DNA, you bring up Dewey Larson, right? And Dewey was the engineer and author who kind of talks about this duality of time, space, space, time, which is just a kind of a Western framework of the higher self versus the different bodies, right? You have your corporal, and then your etheric, and then your astral, and you kind of go up the levels until you're on the other side, where essentially he would call that time, space, or whatnot, where you are now operating in a much higher octave, if you will, where you can communicate back and forth across through those barriers, but you're in different realms, essentially.
It's interesting. I've written about Dewey Larson and time space in two of my books, Potentiate Your DNA, and in my novel Snooze. And in Snooze, I'm sort of fictionalizing the concept, but it's very interesting to think about Dewey Larson and his theory, which he called reciprocal system of physical theory, which is a big mouthful. So I usually just say reciprocal theory. So it's interesting to think about reciprocal theory in relation to simulation theory, because if you look at it in that way, we here in space-time are living in the simulation. So space-time is the simulation. Time-space would be the reality outside the simulation. And that's where all the blueprints are held. That's what is creating the simulation. In the potentiation regenetics model, the blueprint for our physical existence exists in time-space. So I would say to map this onto simulation theory, we're looking at time-space being reality, and we are in the illusion.
The space-time continuum, the illusion of time, that there's some sort of continual timeline when we know there is no such thing. So that makes sense. It's kind of like how Project Looking Glass would be working, right? They were tapping into that, if you believe that was an actual thing that happened.
Right. I mean, it might be that if you're a student taking this simulation, that your life, what we would perceive as a lifetime, happens in maybe a couple of hours, and maybe you get up and you go have a coffee break or something, and you come back and do another life.
And many folks have very rightfully described time as a perception. And going back to the mechanics of things, time is nothing more than the sequential stratification of data. And that's a fancy way of saying a movie frame going by a light source. And so as those frames proceed, and if you are the one watching the movie, it is not only going to create the illusion of motion, but it's also going to create the illusion of time sequence. But as you're talking about, when you transcend which in, like Walter Russell described how being the fulcrum of consciousness, it just means that you are in an awareness state, that you are the one putting those electrical forces, those polarized electrical forces in motion that start the whole frame by frame movie projection in the first place. So again, just defaulting back to simple explanations, the closer you get to the truth, the more simple it does become. And again, it's easy to demonstrate these principles. And so anyway, just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I keep seeing, when people draw cartoons and you do like a little flip book and it, you flip through it and it gives you the illusion of motion and the illusion of reality, something happening through movement. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, some super complex version of that where, our senses are completely fooled into, or we're fooled by our senses into believing that all of this is real. Right. It's interesting to look at, another figure like Neville Goddard and his writings on the imagination. I mean, he has so many things that are very much in alignment with simulation theory and how really all of this is powered by thought and consciousness and the imagination. And even Jason Bashir is out there saying, we're here to develop the three sacred qualities, which he would call intuition, empathy, and ultimately imagination. And the more skilled we get in learning how to utilize our imaginations to interact with the simulation, the more we can change our realities and experience really miraculous outcomes.
Yeah,
in a variety of areas, not just in our day-to-day, but in our our health, and even in maybe larger systems. Now, this is where I would disagree. He believes that a lot of the macro programming is set in stone, and I'm not convinced that that's absolutely true.
No, I don't go along with that either, and it's easy to point out exceptions for that. But you mentioned that Jason was talking about the neurological reception, being how the simulation, we are held captive by it. And that's really true because that is a receptive part of our polarity, and it plays on our nervous system. And the nervous system has a shelf life because it has to operate through neurotransmitters that then degrade not only the neurological tissues, but the neurotransmitters in the process of that reception. So if you do not have the projection part of the polarity that would, relate to the metabolism of our being, then we are not using our imagination to project our reality out simultaneous to receiving data incoming, which not only renews, our own physical body and our consciousness, but it makes us active participants. And of course, what we've been seduced into is just being passive, receptive, non-participants in this reality. And that's why, of course, in our academics, the first thing they teach you is imagination is not real, when in fact, it's the very thing that creates everything in the first place.
Amen. Well said. That's so spot on, Bear. That's exactly my view.
Are you guys familiar with the philosopher Bernardo Kastrup? I believe I'm saying his name right. He's been pretty influential in kind of breaking down modern simulation theory in a very interesting way. And when I like his analogy of the dashboard, our neurology is the dashboard that just allows for us to engage in the reality. And if we aren't, or if we're the pilots in front of the dashboard and we don't know what we're doing, we don't know how to use the dashboard correctly because we're not being driven by, what the universal principle, what I call love is the universal principle, right? That drives it all. Then we don't know how to use the dashboard. So we're not engaging with the reality properly. So it's also knowing how to, the proper techniques and the proper connection to love to be able to use the dashboard so that we can engage in reality correctly. And I think that's a pretty interesting analogy that seems pretty fitting.
Yeah, this is Kastrup, Kastrup, right? Bernardo Kastrup.
Correct.
He's like a computer engineer, and he kind of breaks it down from that perspective and looks
exactly.
at yeah. Yeah, I think that's important work to really have in the background of this discussion. You know, it's like for people to go and look at his work also, because there are some very intelligent people talking about these things right now, and there have been people talking about them for a very long time, back into, you know, I'm going to say into antiquity. I mean, for example, like in like in tantric mysticism, there was something that has been called deity visualization, where these adepts, these Indian adepts, would use their imaginations to create like a person or a god in the room with them, and they would follow certain specific protocols for doing that, and they were actually able to materialize beings that they could exchange information with, or that might put objects into the room. This is very related to a lot of magical practices that have to do with creating familiars and that sort of thing, if you're aware of any of that material. So, I mean, really, the power of the imagination is quite vast, and it's been the area of the kind of the central focus of mystical studies, dating, you know, back through alchemy and beyond.
Yeah, and what I love about the, did I freeze up? Are you guys good? Can you hear me?
I'm good.
Okay, I think Bear might have froze up. What I love about Bernardo's, you know, relationship here, and what you're talking about here with the ancient traditions of magic, and like the ancient oracles at Delphi, for instance, they were all like young women that were still, you know, prime virgins that understood that were directly connected to the agape love principle that was driving their imagination, able to touch these other realms. Is that it takes away the victimhood of being a victim in a simulation. You're an active participant in this as a divine being, right? And I think that's an important aspect. I got Bear back here. He's back in.
Hi guys, lost you for a minute, so I'll catch up.
Hey, Bear, here's a quote that directly speaks to something you said a moment ago. This is William Blake. He says, some see nature all ridicule and deformity, and some scarce see nature at all. But to the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. He also said, imagination is the real and eternal world of which this vegetable universe is but a faint shadow.
You know, that couldn't be more true when you're engaged in farming or gardening. You know, as an example, the other day I went over to one section of the farm and I noticed there's some herbs growing up a trellis that weren't thriving. And I really didn't do, and I experience this all the time. And, you know, I hadn't paid attention to them for a while because they're over in a different corner of the property. So I paid attention for a couple of days, went over them, nurtured them in different ways, you know, hand watering instead of just turning on the irrigation, didn't feed them, didn't do anything else. And, you know, within 2-3 days, they're just thriving. They're bright green and everybody's buoyant and vibrating and healthy. And I know for a fact that's because you know, I am imagining what I want them to be. So nature is a fantastic reflection of that projection quality of our imagination. And I believe the most valuable thing when you're engaged in agriculture of any type is you get to prove that out. So yeah, I love those quotes.
Yeah, I've seen that kind of thing too. It's interesting how the power of the mind can impact the physical world. There are people who do potentiation, for example, for their gardens, and they report some of the most interesting phenomena. Sometimes it's things that grow faster or they seem healthier, and sometimes it's parasitic insects that will just leave. And there's a whole concept around this work having to do with parasites and how you can plug up a certain disposition in your energy fields that makes you susceptible to parasites. And when you do that, you just get rid of them. And this can include not only physical parasites, but things like etheric parasites or archons. or aspects
all
of
the same thing, and they represent the same issue, which is parasites need, old junk to feed on. So if you stop feeding them, there's nothing there for them. They'll just go away on their own.
Right on, right on. So, there's also, I feel like there's this energetic aspect to the parasite equation, and I've written about that in my books. And I think this gets into the Archon material. And we talked a little bit about evil in relation to, dispelling with Tico. And I wanted to also take that back into the Gnostic world. One of the people I learned a lot from early on the subject was John Lash, who wrote Not in His Image, and I really recommend that book. It's subtitled Sacred Vision, Sacred Ecology, and the Future of Belief. And in that book, he basically went in and did his own translations of the ancient Gnostic texts and concluded that they were describing a kind of parasitic infection of the human race by mind parasites that are called Archons. Now, he was looking at this for the most part, even though he describes the Archons in terms that might have to do with a type of artificial intelligence. I think mostly he was seeing this as a very physical scenario, like a real scenario. But if you want to look at it from simulation theory, and this is what Jason's been doing with the Archons, he basically sees that the simulation was hijacked by the demiurge or the Lord Archon or the God of the Old Testament, whatever you want to call it. And that this is why we have experienced many of the difficulties in our reality, because we've been dealing with a kind of foreign parasitic consciousness that has been feeding perhaps on some aspect of our energy. There's this term loosh that gets thrown around in our community, and it has to do with this idea that humans give off energy that these parasitic predatorial beings actually feed on, and this energy comes from states of fear and stress, anxiety, panic, confusion, and the like. So enter the Archons into the equation, and enter the Archons into the simulation.
Yeah, and you could liken old diseased and decaying flesh and matter in the body that attracts parasites, and then you take the emotional states of the lower astral plane, and it's just a representation of that same thing on the physical plane. So
Yeah.
there they enter. And I think we have a lot to learn in this computer age. I believe the whole reason for computers is just to help us understand the nature of ourselves. And one aspect of medicine I practice, we took it to a high level of neurological testing, where we operated the body no different than you sit down to a keyboard on a computer, and we could get that specific and just that expedient with finding out things and then changing things just like you do in a computer. And then you look at some people that make their business of creating viruses. Mike, you can talk more about this, but it's the same thing. It's like interjecting these programs into the computer software that now, they're in control or creating things on your screen that you don't want. But, I think the real lesson in all this is that it's happening on every single level. And we have a way to shore ourselves up, shore our computers up, and even ourselves on the astral plane, so that we aren't operating on those levels and being vulnerable to any of this in the first place.
Yeah, that is an interesting analogy, because typically when you get a malware injection or some sort of quote unquote virus, which is the only virus that exists, it's like a computer virus, is that what typically, how do you get that? It's like you're doing something where you're letting yourself open, because you're either doing some shady stuff, you're going onto the porn, or looking at stuff you shouldn't be, or being stupid, and you're not being a valiant, directed consciousness, right? And so I think that's a great lesson for everything. Like if you do have, like Colin Wilson writes about the mind parasites in his famous book, right? I don't know if you've read that, Saul, or what John Lash talks about with the Gnosticism, was that these parasites feeding off your loosh is because you either don't have the awareness or haven't put the effort in to understand. And that's essentially why I guess we contract to come in here, is to give ourselves a challenge. And I know we have trauma that we deal with, and we have all this that we need to tackle. And I think it's just part of the experience of being in this plane. And if we don't take some responsibility for ourselves and our lives and who we are and why we came here in the first place, to co-create and buck up and do the right work and all that, and it's super fun when you do it, then yeah, you're going to be preyed upon. And this isn't a victimhood thing. This is why we come here, to experience this as God, so we can have the experience and have a challenge. That's what actually drives the creation forward, right? This brings up a question that I always struggle with, gentlemen, and I think you guys can help me with this. There's this idea that we're not here to learn, that we're here just to remember, and that everything has been created and everything already is. But then I also have, that competes with the idea that we are here, to learn and transcend and to ascend and actually create new, and that we are in this kind of primordial creation element that allows us to create the new and continually expand our consciousness. So how do we come to grips with this? Is everything's already been and already is and already always will be, but then how do we tie that in with the idea that we're here to create through love and expand and see the new and witness the new and experience the new? But if it's already there, why are we doing it? Does that make sense? This is like, I guess, a huge philosophical question that people have been thinking of for millennia. But Saul, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions, and those are things that I think about a lot, actually, as an artist, as a writer, and as a painter, for that matter. Like, what is the nature of the creative process, and why am I even doing this, right? I think the notion that everything already exists makes sense if you take time out of the equation. If you take time out of the equation, then you're looking at something static, where you would have that. But when you introduce time, and I think you have to introduce some element approximating time into dynamic systems, that's why we have time that happens in the simulation. And if it's a simulation or a copy of a reality, then that must mean there's time in that reality too. So even our higher selves, at whatever level of consciousness they may be at, they're experiencing time at some level. As a creator, when I hear platitudes or read memes to the effect that we're just here to remember, I kind of want to throw up, or just count me out. That's not my reality. I want to be able to experience novelty, even in the law of one. This is why the one infinite creator sets everything into motion. It's essentially to experience novelty. And so the whole law of one principle is that you have all of these creators being created, just like in the simulation theory that Jason's putting out in many ways, so that at some point we can ascend through the densities, whatever those are, and go through the singularity and emerge on the other side as a creator. I even think the Gnostic story is telling us that is how this works, that you have people in training under difficult circumstances with Archons. And I wrote, Cali the Destroyer is all about this. So I mean, I've thought so much about these issues. You have human people in training to become gods, or eons, or aeons, however you want to pronounce that word, Aeons. And this is the Gnostic term for the divine beings that assist the creator or the originator or God, definitely with a capital G and maybe an O and D as well. But these eons assist with the unfoldment of the originator's creation, and they are essentially future projections of ourselves, because we're going in that direction. One of the eons was, in the Gnostic mythology, was Sophia, who is Mother Earth, and who may actually, in some sense, energetically or otherwise, be the earth that we're standing on, whatever this realm is that we're standing on. I don't know if I answered your question, Mike. Did I? I think I did. I think I actually did respond to it.
That was a very good answer. And here I have Cali the Destroyer, And this is a great example of using creativity to really delve deep into and illustrate these concepts. Fantastic read. If you guys are into sci-fi, fantasy with a Gnostic spin and a lot of awakening truth in this. And of course, with this, you talk about the greatest parasite, government, and how essentially we allow for that macro level of parasitic entity to, if we don't let it go unchecked, it will take over the world and destroy us and destroy itself. And really, it's our own inability to, I guess, come to grips with our own inner demons and who we are essentially as creators that allows for all this to unfold. And that book is really entertaining. I know Bear has read it as well. So if just a shout out for this book, guys, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, myself as well. It's very entertaining, a lot of truth in it. And yeah, just a good read. And as most people are aware by now, just the word government itself literally means mind control. And that's the humorous side of all this, is they're just so in our face, telling us exactly what they're doing. And of course, that is why some of us have delved into the field of legal law, just to unravel the deception that really controls us in our institutions at ground level. Because until you can get free of that level of just gross manipulation, then you're really going to have a difficult time transcending through higher octaves to get into some of the realities that we're talking about today.
Well, you really are. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to mention that government literally means mind control. And there's even this funny confusion when you get into the Gnostic texts, where the word Archon has been interpreted to mean both this extraterrestrial or foreign and parasitic intelligence and government officials or leaders. So there is a conflation there that is kind of hilarious in light of this discussion.
In the traditional Nag Hammadi text or the creation story, are the Archons kind of like fallen angels in a sense? They're part of the hierarchy that were kicked out by the Father Creator?
I mean, that's one of the interpretations. Yeah. That there's lots of interpretations, some of them more well known than others. A lot of people have written about this. I mean, when you take on reading any of these texts, like you get into something like the trimorphic protonoia from the Nag Hammadi library, right? I mean, it's so dense. It's very hard because a lot of these are fragments, and we're talking about being translated from a dead language. And it's very, very difficult at times to make out very clearly what is being said. There are references to beings that we don't know about, it's hard to know what those names mean, that sort of thing. So I would say there's a lot we don't know about what the Gnostics were thinking. But I think John Lash is generally correct that they were people who, in essence, worshiped the earth, Mother Earth. They were definitely a kind of matriarchal, they were involved in a kind of matriarchal thought process or system. Now, in Jason's view, this would have been the world under the vapor canopy. So that's where
talk more about the vapor canopy.
The only vapor canopy I knew was in college in my dorm room.
Yeah, that's where that's what I was talking about. No, I'm just kidding. It's like, what is it? Fast Times at Ridgemont High, when they get out of the van and there's all the smoke that follows them out. Jeff Spicoli and company.
Woo.
That's right.
I've never inhaled.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's because you were doing it through food, Bear.
Yeah, he's inhaled breatharian wise. He's inhaled the solar rays. Dude, we did the dryer sheet filter. You take dryer sheets and put it in an old tube from a toilet paper and then exhale through that.
Oh my God.
Come out smelling like dryer sheets. You guys not know that trick?
Anyways. I think I've heard of that, but I wasn't sure if that was an urban myth. You really did that, huh?
I went to UC Santa Barbara. You can study buzzed. Okay.
That's great. Well,
So
I lived for a little while up in Humboldt County for about 6 months, and literally, when I would walk to the beach, I was in a little town called Manila. I could just smell it on the breeze. It was being blown everywhere. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. So the vapor canopy, it's one of my favorite Jason Archaic's topics because it trips me out, because speaking of the great old cannabis plant, he talks about the purple light and how that's better for plant growth. And when you look at a grow house, what kind of light do they typically have, right, Bear? It's that purple light. What's your take on the vapor canopy, Saul? It's such a trippy idea.
Yeah, well, he said, this is back to Jason. So his take on it is that it was, the biblical word is the firmament, right? And it's this heavy vapor atmosphere that kind of lowers and then rises back up with the diurnal cycle, right? And so it comes down and it kind of wets the earth, and then it goes back up, and that replaces rain. So there's actually no need for rain when you have the vapor canopy operating properly. It also creates a very different atmosphere with different conditions. You can it acts like a kind of lens. So when you're looking out at the sky, at the stars, whatever they are, maybe they're just holographic projections, but whatever they are, they can be seen very clearly, because the atmosphere was actually condensing our vision like a pair of glasses, or a magnifying glass, or a telescope, so that the early traditions were able to map the stars very, very clearly. And back to something Bear said earlier, I would say we also have the stars, again in quotes, in us. This is kind of our bio astrophysiology. So you could also kind of look inside and do a variety of star maps. So you would have another source for maybe making some of those ancient maps. But in any case, it's interesting to think that the canopy was acting as a kind of lens. It was also a very dense atmosphere that made the humans who lived in that world grow to very large size, and they had great strength and stamina. They were very hard to kill. They would regenerate in seconds very often. And these were the titans of mythology. So when the vapor canopy fell, this was the great flood, and it was very catastrophic, but you did have people who survived it. So some of these titans survived. And if they were pregnant pre-flood, and then they had a baby in the world that looked more like the one we inhabit now, without the vapor canopy, then they would have a titan. But if they, a generation later, or if they started mating with other people on the outside, they would have a smaller large being as a child, and those were the giants, because there's this weird distinction between the giants and the titans. And then when the giants had children, those were the heroes, the age of heroes, people like Perseus, Theseus. And then the heroes gave rise to humanity as we know it.
Yeah, such a trippy idea. And there's a wonderful tradition about the giants in North America, giants in Asia. There's, of course, in the classic Nephilim and that whole story.
Right there, Catalina Island, in your old stomping ground.
Yes.
I mean, that is a crazy place.
Yeah, I've dove there, and I used to go there all the time. And there's so much trippy stuff with the Native American lore about
so what's going on there?
Giants. They found all these giants, or evidence of giants. But we're back to the red-haired, double rows of teeth giants.
Wow.
Yeah, those were, so you think the redhead, because obviously there's a ton of interesting archival stuff from the newspapers we know from the late 1800s, and then of course the Smithsonian cover-ups, which have been documented on a lot of places. And then there's even a connection to Abraham Lincoln and some quotes. in regards to the red-headed giants and things like that. So this gets really interesting in Jason's work because he talks about the reset of 1902 and how that was part of maybe the final cleansing of the giants, because the giants are simply a reminder of the true reality. And there's seems like maybe these are an archonic influence trying to have us forget who we come from or where we are or what this is so they can control. So it's very important for them to erase the giants. However, there's archival footage. Have you seen that footage from Japan where there's literally a giant walking? And some people said that's fake, but it looks so darn real. It's like on an island and you see it's from the 1920s, I think. And there's literally a giant walking with the soldiers. Have you seen that?
It's insane. Do you know John Levi? Do you know who that is? He has a YouTube channel.
Hi, I'm John Levi.
Yes. So he has several videos about giants. His voice is really, really funny. And there's some researcher who's done a lot of photographing of this one area in what I believe is Peru, and she got some camera footage, some video footage of what looks like two absolutely gigantic people up on this hill. I mean, it's very, very strange.
Oh yes, I've seen that.
Yeah,
that is crazy.
So yeah, go to John Levi and look up any of his videos that might have to do with giants, and it's just,
and how all a lot of the impossible architecture from quote unquote Tartaria all have giant doors and everything, giant steps, and a lot of the architecture.
They retrofitted these tiny doors to fit modern day humans, into the cathedrals, for example. So you would have started out, with this giant door for maybe the Titans. And then maybe these are actually Tartarian structures, and maybe Tartaria was the world under the vapor canopy.
Yeah.
Hard to say, it's really, really hard to say. But
so according to Jason, we will be having a return to the vapor canopy, right? In 20.
Yeah, so that's really fascinating. So the Phoenix, according to his work, is this protocol within the simulation that causes these cyclical resets every 138 years. So we're looking at the next one in mid-May of 2040. So not terribly long from now. And for him, this is sort of the real end of the Mayan calendar, according to his model and his calculations. And he predicts that not only will there be a Phoenix event where there will be a certain amount of destruction, particularly in Asia, but that there will also be the reinstatement of the vapor canopy, which will begin radically changing our environment and our biological condition here. And that might involve actually growing. We might actually grow several inches or more. This has been documented in some very strange ways with people who were doing research in places where there had been eruptions that might have mimicked certain chemical or atmospheric conditions under the vapor canopy. So
yeah, there's been done with animals too. I think amphibians and stuff in certain tanks and whatnot, and they've grown to much larger size. Go ahead, Bear.
Well, the vapor canopy allegedly also created a uniform temperate condition throughout the whole plain, so that it might explain why archaeologically we find tropical plants and those kinds of species in areas that are not like that today. And when the vapor canopy was pierced, I believe there's good evidence that collective emotions are represented in storms and atmospheric conditions, and it's just a reaction to what humanity throws up into the atmosphere there. And I have read some accounts where, as at one point where consciousness fell to an extreme, then that event created electrical, let's just say, occurrences that pierced that canopy and destroyed it, and then created a lot of the things that now we attribute to ice ages and all sorts of different conditions, radically different in different parts of the plain, rather than the uniformity that seems to be evidenced by archaeological findings as well.
What I love about that perspective Bear, is that it shows how powerful we are, even when we don't realize it. We have the ability to change the world, to change our physical environment, to bring on cataclysms. And this is really the flip side of this is kind of where I wanted to go, because you can look at these ideas having to do with Phoenix return and Nemesis and all of that, and that can be really scary. But you also have to realize that we are very powerful, and that our imagination is such an amazing tool for interacting with the simulation, that we can go through such cataclysmic events completely unscathed, certainly individually. And I know Jason really believes that. And maybe it's even possible to mitigate the effects of those events, or to undo them, which he does not believe can happen. But I think it's absolutely possible that it would be that we could change the architecture. We're always being told things by movies, right? There's so much truth in the movies. And if you look at the original Matrix movie, here you have Neo born into the Matrix, so he's in the simulation, and he learns how to change the simulation. So why can we not change the simulation from within if we want to?
So we are the only species on this plane that has been endowed with that free will and ability to precipitate matter and from consciousness and create experiences in the same way. So if you look at all the kingdoms of nature, and we're the only ones capable of doing that, and obviously have been given that gift, then how could it be any other way?
Right.
That's the thing that just escapes me. It's so obvious that we're at the bottom of everything. It's proven out in so many, fields, medicine, agriculture, different levels of science, how we influence everything. But then we still sit around and wonder if it's possible, when it's in front of our face all the time, that we're the ones that are doing the manipulation, the creation, and responsible for everything. So I think we're finally starting to get a little bit clued in.
Finally, right? I feel like I've been
Mhm.
banging my head on this wall for a long time. I'm in the process of going back through and putting together my first book that it's called Beginner's Luke, and it's about a guy. I published 3 volumes of it. I didn't do a good job with it. I got a contract for the book from a New York publisher. I decided not to take that deal. I didn't feel good about giving my book rights away, and I still don't. I still don't like doing that. Long story short, I'm reissuing the book as I had originally conceived it, as a very large volume that's made up of 6 internal books, quote unquote books. So it's like 6 gigantic chapters that are broken down into subchapters. And the entire story is about a guy basically wandering around the simulation, which is how I interpret it now. And he's imagining his existence. He's actively imagining it. And he doesn't always realize that he's imagining it. And he does all kinds of crazy things and gets into all kinds of trouble, but he's always the one creating it all. And then he creates his way out of it. And this just goes on and on and on a kind of ascending trajectory till you get to the end of the book, and there is something like an ascension event. It's all very humorous. It's very tongue-in-cheek, very naughty, all of those wonderful things. But the central tenet is, this is just an example of what we're all doing. We're all wandering around, imagining things, and to the extent that we can do that consciously, we have greater power. Now, I also believe there's a lot of people walking around who are basically undead, don't have any power, conscious ability to use this power at all, because they've divorced themselves from it. And then you have the kind of weird notion that within a simulation, some of the people, maybe many of our so-called leaders, aren't even people. They're just NPCs.
There sure seems to be indication of that right now, doesn't there?
Yeah, I did a blog on my Substack. You can go to what is my Substack? Let me pull that up so people can go over there. It's saulluckman.substack.com. And so I did a blog recently, and it was just putting a series of pictures that I've collected over the last couple of years. into just a stack of pictures, right? And all these people in all these crazy looking masks and things, including like Biden and other people. The article is titled, "Will the real Joe Biden please fall down?" and other freakish mysteries on the world stage. And so just go check out that blog. Look at all those pictures. It will blow your mind.
Yeah, they've definitely taken the wrong pill there and given themselves up to the archonic influence. And there's an interesting idea that Stellium, who 7 in the chat, who does some great work, by the way, shout out to him for uncovering, going into the archaeological, not even the geological historic history here of finding rocks that are shaped like different organs. And this idea that maybe our current technology that is not Tartaria, it's the inverted technology. They're literally mining the Titans, what are left over from them, and using them as an energy source, right? And it's sort of, because we do live in that parasitic sort of reality right now, controlled by this archonic influence, right? And so they're literally mining from the past. But it seems like with 2040, if Jason's onto something here, then this is just the system, as he explains, what he calls what's the parasitic thing he calls something X? I'm blanking.
Artificial intelligence X.
Yeah, AIX.
Mm-hmm.
That AIX, which is the archonic influence, gets wiped out. It gets just kind of cleaned out, right, through these resets. That's what the role of that is. And really, you could look at that as just our own kind of collective consciousness cleaning it out, or as the traditions of like the ascended masters, it's the angelic host. It's this like these higher intelligence that come down and support us, because we all have a role to play. So it is interesting to think, though, that those Titans that were destroyed, that were so large, 40, 50, 60, 100, 200 feet tall, who knows, that you can see that in the geological record still.
Yeah, there's a lot of people doing fascinating work on looking at structures that we would consider to be mountains, and wondering if they're buildings or trees, or like the carcass, the fossilized, petrified carcass of something like a dragon. Or, really, there's really amazing work out there. I also wanted to say, Mike, that I feel like the archontic grip in the simulation has already been broken. That the simulation is already cleansing itself of their influence, and that's playing out in the kind of breakdown of these archontic projections, who are these NPCs, like quote unquote Biden or Nancy Pelosi, or people who literally appear to have to be like droids in something like Blade Runner, and they're breaking down and slowing down, and they lose the ability to speak coherently.
Yeah, the etheric energy source is being disconnected from them. They are a
when
joke.
I watch them, I expect them to start flickering in front of my eyes or something.
That's what I'm getting at.
Well, and Hollywood seems to be really kind of portraying the reality more and more. Like there's this movie that just came out that you could call a Gnostic film. And there's a great tradition of Gnostic films out there. I say The Matrix is one of those. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Have you seen that, Saul? Are you familiar with this? Trippy.
I haven't seen it. I've heard the title. Do you recommend it?
I do, just because, and there is your traditional wokeism in it, of course, like the daughter's an Asian lesbian and all that. But, within the framework of this narrative, it's very much tied into, of course, they call it the metaverse, right? That's like that's going through all the Marvel movies right now. And it's the metaverse, that everything is a sort of dimensional reality, right? That everything's spiraling off fractally. But it's a very much a Gnostic movie, because there's this sort of like evil presence in it, and she's essentially fighting this who's her daughter, but is this like archonic infinite evil that she's going through all these different realities while splitting off from her physical reality, the main character. And so it's a sort of like very much schizophrenic, weird Philip K. Dick type of movie. But it's fascinating that it seems like if you just go look on Demon Flicks or Prime right now, all the sci-fi movies that are coming out that are just a dime a dozen and are terribly written. This one is actually okay. They're all exploring these ideas, these concepts. So it's like the reality is having to now come to grips with this. And I believe movies are a creative influence from our subconscious that have to play out because of the, in the demonic sort of archonic influence has to show us what they're doing. So they playing it out through films and stuff so that we can sort of at least have an understanding or an agreement that, yeah, this is the reality we accept. But yeah, check that out. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. What a trippy movie.
Yeah, I'll check that out. You made me remember that I wanted to mention, the whole meta thing in relation to the simulation. And you brought in the movies, all the Hollywood stuff that's going on and Netflix and all that kind of thing. What they tend to do is they tend to take the truth and then they take it far enough to let you realize that, let the awake kind of realize, oh, okay, they're talking about the simulation, and then they'll twist it in some way to make it seem like either it's not actually real, haha, we're just making a joke, or it is real and you're absolutely powerless inside it.
Yeah. So Saul, how does the the concepts put out by Steiner, if you've delved into that at all, behind the two polarities, Lucifer and Ahriman, fit into all this?
Yeah, I've wondered about that. How you would if it's possible to superimpose that onto Gnosticism and Archons, because really you sort of have the unipolar evil in that model, which is the Archons. You don't really have the Luciferic and the Harmonic energies, right? So I don't know how to actually make that fit. Do you have any ideas if they might fit?
Well, Ahriman, of course, is that polarity that we're experiencing now, which is materialistic and just going down the left-hand neurological pole at the expense of the heart. And then, of course, Lucifer was the, people, perceive these concepts as a devil when, really not like that. But Lucifer would be that Eastern sort of philosophical, just desire to get out of your body rather than grounding in and manifesting and being a creator on this plane. And if you look at it really appears that a lot of our leaders and would-be leaders these days and people in circles of influence are really intent in conjuring up a portal for Ahriman to actually embody on this plane. I think maybe, there's something to that. As far as how that fits into, past occurrences, as far as Archons and things, I look at them as really working more interdimensionally. And, there's a lot of work that came through with, what's his name's, with Orgone,
Reich,
where they, yeah, thank you, Reich, who was using technologies that then became morphed by other people where they could actually photograph these interdimensional entities. And some of the entities were very indifferent. Some were completely unaware of us. Others were very aware and actually participating in helping us. And then meanwhile, others were actively trying to sabotage us by way of their ability to access the mental plane and manipulate us from that level. So I think, that ties in with the whole Ahriman influence in the interdimensional realm, and perhaps how the Archons also operate on that level. I don't know, just all conjecture, but I just wanted to, see if you had any thoughts on it.
Those are interesting ideas. Do you see the embodiment of Ahriman as being something like the Antichrist?
Yeah, that's an interesting term. Of course, it takes on all connotations of a lot of religious concepts and things.
The reason I asked that, it's been on my mind a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I've been going through all of this archaics material, so I've just been thinking about these
Mm-hmm.
concepts. Jason talks about how the the whole Kovacs thing, could be a kind of implant, for helping to establish conditions that would be realized with the appearance of that figure, however you want to define it. So, I have no idea. I mean, clearly there's a kind of, gross materialization happening, or materialism, I should say, happening with the whole view of health and wellness and medicine, and the idea that you need some kind of physical injection into your body to ward off some other physical thing that's going to happen to you. Your mind plays absolutely no role in that, so this is kind of the apotheosis of a certain sort of materialism, if you want to talk about the Ahriman figure in that light. I mean, it's interesting how you have this idea of Ahriman, but it also works through, as you were noting, the mental energies, which I always associated with the Luciferic stuff, like the light of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like
And
they're the same figure. There's like they're like the hemispheres of the brain or something like that.
yeah. And then, of course, Steiner would go back and say that the middle way between those two polarities is the Christ consciousness, the perfect balance of understanding there is a life force beyond just physicality. But then again, Ahriman going the other extreme as far as, the superstition of materialism. But however, if you balance the two out, it does allow us to be creative beings, going back to what we're talking about as far as using our imagination to manifest, reality here on the ground. You mentioned the vax, and there's a lot of conjecture as far as well as they're shedding, can people that have been purposely infected like that affect other people? And, as far as the physical phenomena, that I think there's good evidence that that is true. But more pertinent to our discussion here, when you get into like pranic healing practices, which I did for many years, still do, you are really looking into those subtle bodies, and just those toxic lower emotions, as we've already mentioned, can be quite contagious. And when you take one of those serums, we'll loosely call them, injected into your body that are doing unnatural things, forcing unnatural reactions in your body, and then also making you prone to be predisposed to just that one pole that we've been alluding to, that is very contagious. Just like when you buy a piece of jewelry or something, that's been used by another person, that carries an energetic quality, and you want to be very careful. Just like when you move into a home that's been inhabited or buy antique furniture, those carry that kind of energy. So when, you need to clear that, you have to be perceptive enough to realize that, that is a contagion, that is parasitic. So when they're purposely injecting us with these things, that create all these abnormal responses, that is a way of infecting each other. And even those that haven't been injected are going to be, if they don't have their wits about them, going to take on those contagions. And that is, I believe, what a lot of this whole business is about, is infecting the whole population, whether you take that into yourself physically or not.
Yeah, all the more reason to be a real student of the imagination and of the power of the imagination. I
Yes, thank you.
I recommend Neville Goddard's work very highly. Just, you can get his books. A lot of it's just out there for free. There's also very cheap editions of collections of his work on Amazon. There's YouTube channels that have a lot of the talks that he gave, and he will really inspire you to source your power from within. And it's very possible, it's very doable, anybody can do it. There are really interesting little things you can do to actualize positive outcomes, which might just be having a strong and healthy body during these times. If that's if that is of concern, you could simply at night as you're going to bed, you can think about that, you can feel it, and you can visualize it, and you could even speak words of thanks if you wanted to. And I'm adding that in to create an action aspect to this, to put it into motion, because you have in the Bible that line that faith without works is dead. So if you just think about something, if you just feel something, will that make it happen? Maybe not. You actually have to do something. I believe there's a formula in conscious healing that I created years ago, and it's sound plus intention equals healing. And so, or intention plus sound. So you have the thought, the intention, and then you have the sound, which is kind of this emotional experience. That's why music is so emotional. The sound carries emotion. But then you're actually verbalizing something, and that's the action. And that's how you get to actual manifestation. That's the real secret, the real law of attraction that I'm describing.
Yeah, that what you're describing too is very much like eurythmy, which is Rudolf Steiner's system of healing, where you go through motions and the different processes that mimic how physicality metamorphosizes in the first place, and then you go into silence. And you also, intone sounds and words and things, but then you go in silence and then speak those same tones or words in silence. And it has a way of just sequentially ingraining that further and further. For you folks in the healing arts out there, it's an evolutionary process. And I'll just, personally myself, I realized that, what I had to learn out of spending the years I was engaged in the arts. And of course, early on, you're always looking for those physical modalities and techniques. And, I explored all those different avenues, and they are effective. But if your intention is to really see what makes things tick, you get the inner voice at a certain point says, okay, take your hands off of bodies, start going more to those unseen forces, those so-called subtle bodies. And that's why I gravitated more to things like pranic healing over the years, because it forces you to go into that imagination side of yourself, see those colors, project the colors, and then also develop that knack of perceiving what's going on in not only your subtle bodies, but in somebody else's. When you persist over the years as a physician or practitioner type, and you just keep doing the hands-on healing, you really aren't moving the ball downfield as far as, developing what we're really here to develop in the first place. So the healing arts can be a fast track, I think, to personal development. But, you really have to watch the signs. And when that voice says, okay, no more physical interaction, now you go completely through the imagination, that's where the real magic happens. That's where real powerful medicine happens. And then you also realize that that's what made your physical modalities tick in the first place. And I think that's catching on with the general population these days is, we're understanding that that's where our real power lies. And it's what we've been talking about in this whole discussion, which is great.
That's so true. And, a lot of people, they believe that there's something either unreal or deeply unscientific or untrustworthy about the imagination. And if you're applying it kind of indiscriminately, maybe there could be some of those elements, but really and truly, the healer is an imaginer. When you see things, when you're trying to pick up on what's going wrong with somebody or what's not working, you're bringing your imagination to bear on understanding that person's reality. If this is not some kind of cold scientific scanning process, this is an imaginative interaction with another informed field.
Which brings us full circle back into shamanism.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's so much circularity in all levels of shamanism. It's very interesting to, back to Jason's work, because he's been a wonderful spine for this discussion, but he talks about the importance of phi and and is phi and pi. So you've got the spiral and the circle, essentially, right? So all of this stuff just keeps coming around back to itself, sometimes at a higher level. And Jeremy Narby's wonderful book, the Cosmic Serpent, Shamanism and Healing. You know, you have shamans going in, having a vision, having some kind of interaction with what might be the spirit of DNA, and then that spirit gives them information about which sounds and maybe thoughts to convey in their shamanic healing work for a specific person. It's like you're just given the information. You go in, you yourself go through a kind of healing process. You go in, you get that, you bring it back out, you give it to someone else.
Yeah, the Native Americans here, I have a firefighter friend, coworker who is Yurok, and whenever someone is ill or is not doing well symptom wise in the tribe, what they do is they the whole community comes together and they essentially start a fire, and they put that person in the middle of a circle. So they're in a circle, pi, right? And then they all dance and sing and chant while going around and around this person for days on end until they heal. So that person is now fasting, dry fasting. They're all putting their intention together. They're creating a harmonic chant. So they have the word coming out, and they're all putting their intention of healing into that person. And that person typically in 2 to 3 days then comes out of the fever or whatnot, and they see the healing time and time again. Now, this is an ancient practice. And what's trippy is my friend was telling me there's a story when they were doing this in the early 1900s in his tribe, and a Sasquatch came down and started dancing on the outside ring as he was called in. And then so they were literally, through their creative force, bringing in this creative entity to come in, which they called the Mountain Man. They didn't call it Sasquatch. And then, of course, the legend goes that the Sasquatch grabbed a teenage girl and took off into the woods. But that aside,
that rascal.
Rascal.
Very interesting, right? The shamanic tradition that's tying in everything we've been talking about today: harmonics, the voice, singing, the word, the pi, the circularity, the space-time connection, the element of fire, all that in there. And that's the ancient knowledge that we just need to be reconnecting with.
Which brings back, possibly the answer to your question earlier, Saul, which is it possible for a group of people with less stellar intentions to get together and conjure up a portal to bring forth these interdimensional beings that aren't that great, like Ahriman? And whether or not that's possible or not, there seems to be definite evidence that it's being done right now. Everything from CERN to, the little, rituals that they do with their sacrificial practices and things. So, yeah, it's just like anything else. Any technology can be used in either direction.
Well,
Right.
And the thing I was going to say about Ahriman is, of course, that comes back from the Zoroastrian tradition, right? That Steiner took from, because he was an ultimate synchro mystic in many ways. And just thinking back to my timetable, I think Zoroastrian time might have been under the vapor canopy. So maybe
I've often thought that.
Yeah, so maybe that tradition had an awareness and were very much keyed in on this idea. If you go to extreme materialism, then that will literally create an emanation of that entity into the fold as a sort of golem, if you will, of the archonic energy, where we literally have a manifestation of materiality from our own fall, if you will, into materialism that creates this Ahrimanic character that will literally, as Steiner says, will actually, come in this plane, right? And he will be an actual physical force that could actually be some sort of golem or robot type of AI that could play into the AIX idea of Jason. So there's a lot of tie-ins here between Steiner and Jason Brashear's work for sure.
One quick comment about that in something I read a long time ago, and it was in an account that was written back in the 1800s or perhaps earlier, and it came through Ascended Master teaching circles that I've been involved with, and they described how before one's ascension, when one was truly reaching a depth ship, at that higher level, one of the tasks they would do while still in physical form is to create an actual body with their imagination and bring forth a body into the physical that was like one of these little human creatures with all the attributes of a human. And that was the final task as far as being able to materialize something like that in the physical. What came of those creations afterwards, I don't know.
Oh, that is fascinating. Yeah, I wanted before we, sign off today, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the vapor canopy again. And
Good.
I wanted to suggest that there's somebody out there who's possibly making it possible for us to experience some aspects of the vapor canopy right now, and that's George Weissman. Are you familiar with the AquaCure?
Yes, of course. And it's funny you bring him up because literally a guest we're having come on to talk about primary water are working with George as well. And they literally, Cosmic Sojourner, shout out to you. We'll have you and Russell Anderson on the show next month to go deep into primary water. But they're working with George on the what's it called? Brown's gas, and asked if we should have George on AlphaCast. So yeah, it's time. We're ready to have George on. It's long overdue.
So here's the thing: in a very dense atmosphere like that, I would think, and I really want to interview George on my podcast and ask him what he thinks. But I would assume that you would be producing a lot of this kind of hydrogen, this Brown's gas, this what he also calls hydroxy. I would assume the atmosphere would be full of it, and it would be at least largely responsible for why things would grow fast and large and why you would heal.
I'm literally drinking during the show my hydrogen water as we speak, actually. Bear and I are
so I got I've been in really good shape for a long time and very active, and I can exercise for a very long time, but I started doing the hydroxy not too long ago, a few months ago. And I had, I had some interesting things happen. I had a mole on my back that just mysteriously disappeared. He describes that. George describes that phenomenon. He also describes the shrinking and disappearance of old scars that that have been there for a very long time. Sometimes they're very large. There's a video of him with his assistant on his website. And his assistant had gotten in a terrible motorcycle accident and had a massive scar on his arm that was almost completely gone after drinking the water and inhaling the Brown's gas as well. And then George also talks about getting a lot stronger, right? So I've noticed that at the end of my my kind of paleo workouts, when I'm doing a lot of like crawling around on the floor and things like that, at the very end of these pretty strenuous workouts, I'll do push-ups. And I was doing Wim Hof's breathing method for a long time, the last year and a half or so. And I'd gotten to where I could pop out of bed in the morning if I wanted to, and I could knock out about 100 push-ups. And that was really about where I maxed out. That was when I was fresh. It was first thing in the morning. Now, just drinking this water and doing a tiny bit of inhaling, because I believe that regenetics makes your system much more efficient. So I cannot do a lot of this stuff. It just pushes me way too fast, but I can do a little bit of it. And I've been doing that for a while. And I think it was, I think yesterday was when I hit at the end of my workout, an hour-long workout, I hit 170 push-ups.
Wow. Hydrogen, of course, being the most abundant element, also is that correlated with the first level of ether, which is the original fire element that then initiates all precipitation down on the ground. So if you want to look at, hydrogen inhalation and making hydrogen more abundant, it kind of makes more sense. And especially if you combine that with intention, that it would have a great effect on your physical body, obviously.
Yeah, I think so too, you know, and I think by volume, it's the most important, you know, nutrient for us. It's just,
Yeah.
we're made up of that by volume. And I like the way you connected that to that primary creational level, you know. I think there's something to that
Right.
there.
And are you using the AquaCure?
Yeah, I've got
His
the
machine there?
AquaCure. I've learned how to do that, and that's just really something I've been interested in for a long time, and I wanted to try it out, and I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've got to order that.
I've been in really, you know, I've been in good shape and in good health for a while, so it's not like I'm looking to cure anything specific that I'm looking for, like hardcore. So, you know, I'm just monitoring little things that I deal with, and you know, and I'm just noting this tremendous increase in strength. That's in strength and stamina, I would say.
Well, that's the best way to use things. You know, unfortunately, most people wait till they get sick or have a problem. But, you know, these are great modalities to use just to up your game. And, you know, I think, you know, just for the fun of it rather than trying to fix a problem. So when you're feeling better is really the most optimal, or when you're feeling good already is the best time to do these things.
Yeah, I just want to surf better, man.
Exactly.
Crushing at all levels. That's when I'm always focusing. I've learned that from you, Bear. It's like when I'm feeling really good, like I am. Well, I realized I'm not invincible when I fell down that cliff earlier this week because I was starting to feel invincible. But yeah, no, like definitely tapping into the cell salts and C60 and the hydrogen water and the ice baths and the sun gazing and the UT and all the breath work. Don't wait till you're sick, guys. Like that's all part of the upkeep, and it's not about upkeep so you don't get sick. It's about more about feeling even better and better and optimizing to where you can just be like just crushing it every day and enjoying your life to the maximum.
That's
so
right.
Mike, don't look at it as falling down a cliff. That was just like Neo trying to jump across to the next building there. So that was just your first attempt. You'll get there. And, you know, the thing I'm having the most fun with these days, you know, I went through my whole, you know, younger years in athletic careers and all that, and really focused on the physical. But now I feel like the most fun challenge of all is getting into what most of us are programmed to believe is old age. You know, I'm into my 70s now, which doesn't seem old and all. Okay, you look different and all that. But it really becomes like a new athletic challenge. It's just, okay, how much can you achieve at this? And, you know, a lot of us, we kind of worship youth and make that a thing of it in and of itself. But youth is actually something to be overcome, not something to be admired. So the real game begins when you are, you know, on in years and your hair's turned white and everything. It's like, okay, you know, bring it on. Let's see, you know, if we can just merge the hopefully some wisdom you've gained over the years and merge it into your physical body and achieve a whole thing. And I think that's what, you know, the next stage of humanity is to overcome what some people said the last enemy to overcome, which was death, right?
Yeah, I'm on the same wavelength, Bear. I'm definitely looking at aging as gracefully as possible and keeping tremendous functionality at all levels. So that's a big piece for me.
Dude, 70's the new 40, Bear. Didn't you know that? So you're good.
Yeah,
Man.
Bear, you
I
look
do know
great.
that.
You look absolutely great.
Well, aging, what is aging, right? Aging is a mindset. That's for sure. And we know masters that have been in this realm for hundreds and hundreds of years that have mastered out of the materiality. And it's just aging is materialism in terms of the way that modern society looks at it, right? Versus aging, which is more about wisdom and more about refinement. That's the type of definition I like to use for aging.
That's a good one.
Hey guys, this has been a great chat. Any final stuff to bring up, Saul, as we part ways for today? This is my favorite stuff to talk about, by the way. So love having you on.
This has really been fun. Thank you so much, Saul. It's always a delight to talk to you. So any final things?
Oh gosh, well, thanks for asking, and thanks for having me on. This has been really fun. It's my favorite stuff too. I really can't get enough of it. I know that my family sometimes get a little annoyed with me because I'm constantly watching videos and talking about this kind of thing. So anyway, it's wonderful to be indulged by you guys. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to let's see. Alex Zek is putting together some kind of 2-day little series of seminars or videos, or I don't know what he's doing exactly.
They're doing the Health Freedom for Humanity live stream in September, which I'll be a part of. If that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I'm going to be doing some kind of presentation at that as well on similar subject matter. I'm really wanting to talk about how to use the imagination for manifestation and healing and beyond. So that's the next thing I've got, the public appearance kind of thing. And I'm also in the process of bringing out a couple books. So if people, want to follow what I'm doing, you can sign up for my newsletter. That's at crowrising.com. I'm on Telegram. You can look up what is it, t.me/Saul Luckman. I think that's what it is. And then I'm on Substack. I'm doing a lot of really good stuff there. And my blog at Snooze to Awaken, that's snooze with the number 2 awaken.com, has a lot of articles not by me. I've published a lot of stuff on the fallacies of germ theory. I do all kinds of articles and interviews with people like Dr. Mark Bailey and Sam Bailey and Tom Cowan and Andy Kaufman and Dr. Bear and other people. So, please check out that work. I feel honored to be able to chat with these great minds and offer, that to my audience. So I'd love for you to come take advantage of that, because it needs to be shared. The word needs to get out there about what real science is, about how biology really works. The real nature of quote unquote germs. This is really important stuff to understand. We can't expect to ascend, if you want to use that word, with a false version of how the human body interacts with nature.
Here. And thanks to your work and Bear here and on the terrain film, and was it Andy Cowan, I believe is what Mike Eden said. Mike Eden, ex-Pfizer exec, who is very vocal about issues with the jibby jab, has now come out and said that he now understands that there's no such thing as a respiratory virus. That does not exist.
Oh, and big. That's big.
Yeah. And he said, thanks to, I think he said Andy Cowan, or he said he merged them. And lately Tom Kaufman, I think he said, and Tom said, no, I did not get married. I did not merge with Andy. But that's really cool. I mean, that's huge, right? And Alex Zek, shout out to him. He's been instrumental in connecting everybody and really having a voice. He's 30 years old. He just turned 30. And Alec is, for his age, just absolutely crushing it. So we're excited that you're involved with that. Alec is actually coming out to Music in Sky. I know you're probably not going to be able to make it, Saul. I gave you an invite, but maybe
I would love to come.
Maybe you can go to the East Coast one, because we are decentralizing Music in Sky. We will be doing a workshop at the event. If you want to become a certified Music in Sky producer and to create your own Music in Sky in your neck of the woods, come out, you'll get certified. We'll support you so that we can have Music in Skies in the Midwest, East Coast, Australia, England, etc. Very exciting. China Music in Sky. So
very exciting.
Yeah. So dude, you're just crushing it on so many levels, dude. We appreciate you so much. Love your artwork, love your books. I will make sure all the show notes in the show notes below will have your Telegram, your blog, your website. Interesting that your original website had Phoenix tied to it too. Another sort of sync there with good old Jason. So
isn't it funny? Yeah. Phoenix Genetics. Yeah, that's funny to me.
And Bear's, original company was Regenitech. So
that's really funny. Gosh, it's amazing. It really is kind of you can't make this stuff up. At a certain point, you know, you're just being kind of winked at by the simulation over and over and over.
Exactly. So we'll wink right back at you guys. I hope you enjoyed this talk. If you did, give us a thumbs up, share with your friends and family. That really helps us get this information out. Go support Saul and all his work. Go buy his books. They're quite enjoyable. I've got actually Potentiate Your DNA right here. I was going through again. I've got it like bookmarked and stuff. Your story is so fantastic too. I mean, you've gone through the hero's journey of rebirth. You yourself were injured. And we talked about this in the first Alpha Cast with you, but by the devil's prick, and you were able to go through that journey and heal yourself. And then of course we're downloaded the whole Regenetech or your DNA potentiation, which I've done, by the way. And I've got my potentiation journal right here, Saul. I've kind of gone out of practice a little bit because life takes you out of swing, but I really did enjoy it. I had the chart memorized and was doing my toning every day. And it's a really fun practice. And I highly recommend it to folks. If you are, your interest has been piqued, get Potentiate Your DNA book and go into it. It's a very fun process. And it involves tuning forks. So we got to sync with Eileen McCusick, who was on recently. I mean, everything, all of our Alpha Casts, like, I mean, this whole year, every single one is connecting. It's really cool, man, as we really bring forth the new science, the real science, the ancient science back to the forefront. So thank you guys for joining us today on the chat. It was a really good chat. If you guys are listening right now and want to join us, we do this every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time on Unite.live, which is the old Be Sovereign. We're on Odyssey and we're on LooshTube as well as Fakebook and DLive. So love you guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much. Remember to get outside, get your feet in the soil, go plant something, go for a hike. Mother Nature is our best teacher. And so go show her some love. Okay, guys, have a beautiful weekend. Cheers.